talk a little bit about the classes. Now, today we're going to be talking about fish. So, when we say what does that mean?
Things with a backbone?
Yeah, these are animals with a backbone, with a spine, you might say. So your backbone, your spine, obviously is in your back. In the middle of your back, you feel it. In the middle of your back there. And really saying a backbone is not all that accurate, because what is your spine made out of? A whole bunch of circular, smaller bones, all stacked together, with little discs in between to cushion them. And then in the middle is sort of a tunnel that goes through all of those vertebrae. What's in that tunnel? Nerves. Your spinal cord. Okay, that's what's in that tunnel, and that's important because your spinal cord takes information from your brain and brings it to other parts of your body. So when you are writing your notes right now, your brain is telling your muscles what to do. But in order for them to actually move, that message goes down the base of your brain through your spinal cord until it gets a little ways down your spine, and then it branches off and goes down your arm. And your brain tells your arm muscles, your wrist muscles, how to move and what to do. So it conveys all that information. Also brings information from your arms. The feel of you writing that goes up, back through those nerves, up in your spine and back to your brain to use that information. So your spinal cord is very important. And as you probably know, if a person damages their spinal cord, they can lose the use of certain parts of their body because now, so for example, somebody damaged their spinal cord down low, their brain may be telling their legs to do something. But as that message travels down the spinal cord, it gets to a break. And then it can't continue any longer, so that message can't get to the leg muscles to actually move them. So if a person may be paralyzed because of spinal cord damage, it's not that their muscles don't work, it's that that message from their brain can't get to their muscles to tell them to move.
Wait, so if it breaks, won't the nerves just like go into...
No, the nerves in the spinal cord generally do not heal themselves.
But wouldn't it like send a message to a different muscle?
No, because if you're sending a message to your leg muscles to move, it needs to go all the way down to the bottom of your spine and then out. So if there's damage up higher, it can't get there. It can't go over that gap. Is that?
So your brain sends a message to your spinal cord in like thousands of seconds.
Oh yeah, almost instantaneously. Yes.
That's awesome.
All right. So anyway, that's why these are animals. They're vertebrates. They have a spinal cord. That's the definition. So the kingdom we are in is the animal kingdom. What's the name of the phylum?
Vertebrates.
Animals.
Think about spinal cord. These are chordates is the name of the phylum. Chordate. And then in insects and other species, an external skeleton we call an exoskeleton. Anyone want to take a guess what you call an internal skeleton like we have?
An endoskeleton.
Close, it means that. Endo. The prefix is endo, which means inside. Endoskeleton.
Endo.
So we're going to talk about 5 different types of vertebrates. What are those? Fish. And technically, there's actually 3 classes of fish. There's bony fish, which is probably, if I say fish, you're probably thinking of a bony fish. But then there's also jawless fish, which there's only like 2 types of, and cartilaginous fish. Fish whose skeletons are actually not made of bone, but made of cartilage, like sharks and rays are cartilaginous. Because they still have that spinal cord. It's just not surrounded by bone.
What about like whales and dolphins?
Mammals.
Oh.
Yeah, those are mammals. All right, so fish. Frogs isn't a class. Amphibians is the class. Reptiles. Birds.
Humans. Almost sapiens.
Yes. Mammals.
Didn't we just say that? Oh, no.
So, fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. Those are our groups that we'll be talking about. And we're not going to take long. We'll take, a day or maybe 2 days to talk about each one of them. We'll move through these fairly quickly.
What kind of
Today we're going to be starting with fish.
What kind of fish?
And what we're going to do is, for each of these classes, we're going to talk about adaptations, things they have, because they all are sort of unique. We'll talk about some of the adaptations they have that allow them to be successful. Starting with fish and their body covering. Fish are covered in not a layer of skin, but in scales. Scales are, if you know like how a roof is made, shingles on a roof. When you put them down, they're putting down one over the other, and they all overlap each other. It provides an extra layer of protection. And that's what the scales on fish are like. Protects them. Also, they secrete a layer of mucus. If you ever went fishing, you picked up a fish and noticed that's kind of slimy, that's because of that mucus they produce. It helps them glide through the water. It helps prevent parasites and things from getting in between their scales.
Like when you go fishing and you like get a fish out of the water and you like put it on the boat, why does like water like come out of their like gills?
Probably just because it's inside of there, trapped in there. Once they come out, it just sort of drains out.
If you like get a fish that's colorful, is the color in the scales or like an under?
No, it's in their scales. It's the scales that are the colors. And you could actually, if you look at a scale, I had to do in college, I had to take a whole class only about fish. So a few things will tell you from that class. But one of the things is we looked at fish scales under the microscope. You can actually tell how old a fish is by looking at scales. They form rings, kind of like a tree, and you can count the rings. It tells you how many years old that fish is. They also have a little bone in their skull called the otolith. You could do the same thing. If they're dead and you take that little, it's like a little marble, and if you slice it, you can actually look at that and see how many layers it has, because each year it grows another layer, and that tells you how old the fish is as well. And some fish have thick scales, big scales, and you can see them, you can feel them, they're really rough. Others, like if you think about a trout, if you've seen a trout, or even like if you go to the grocery store on the fish shucks and you look at the fish there, a trout, you can hardly even see their scales. They're very, very small and very, very fine. Other fish have really big scales, and it's obvious to see them. Many fish also have this trait that's called an adaptation called counter shading. Counter shading is when the organism is darker on the top and lighter colored on the bottom side. And this is common in fish, but also in birds. Can anyone tell me how that might be a useful adaptation? Zoe?
Because if there's a predator underneath it, then it can't really notice it that much.
Yeah. It's because they may have predators above them or below them. So they have a light underside, so that if there's a predator below them looking up, that light underside sort of blends in with the sky above the water. Predators from above looking down on it see the darker half, which blends in better with the bottom of the lake or the ocean that's there. So it helps them blend in both ways. And again, same thing with birds. Many birds have a similar characteristic because they may have predators above or below them. There's a salmon, and you can see that distinct pattern of darker on top, lighter on the
What's
bottom.
up with its mouth?
That's just the shape of it.
When you say about like smaller scales, does that mean they have more scales?
Yeah, yeah.
Not a fish.
Wait, what
That's a
is
penguin.
that? Is that a penguin?
Yeah, that's not a fish. What is it?
Penguin.
What is a penguin?
Man, it's a flightless bird.
Every single class today I've heard both things, bird and mammal. Which is it?
Bird.
Mammal.
Bird.
It is a bird.
Yeah!
A penguin is a bird. Its wings, though, are adapted not for flight, but for swimming.
Isn't it a mammal?
Is that why it lays eggs?
Don't they almost?
All right. For each of these classes, we'll talk also about their body temperature. There's basically two options for vertebrates for their body temperature: warm or cold-blooded. Fish are cold-blooded. So what does that actually mean? So if cold-blooded, it's not a great word because their blood's not like actually cold. What does it mean if something's cold-blooded? Michael?
If they're in an area that is cold, they can regulate their body temperature
Not quite. Nicholas?
Their body temperature doesn't automatically it's not like 95 whatever.
Okay. Yeah, it changes. Their body temperature goes up and down depending on their climate, their surroundings. So right now in the Adirondacks, the lakes are frozen. Underneath that frozen water, there's liquid water. Maybe it's 36, 37 degrees Fahrenheit. The fish living there, that's what their body temperature is right now. It's dropped way down to 36 to 37. At a low body temperature, they can't swim very much, but they also don't need much food. Okay, their whole body basically slows down, their heart rate slows down, the amount of oxygen they need slows down, so they can survive with very little food throughout the whole winter. In the summer, when that ice melts and the water temperature increases to 60 or 65, their body temperature increases to 60 or 65. They can be much more active, they can go mate, they can get more food. But the benefit of being cold-blooded is you require much less food. Warm-blooded animals need to eat a lot of calories just to keep their body temperature at a certain level. So fish are cold-blooded. Fish also have an organ called the lateral line, which is unique. It is a sense organ that helps them sense vibrations in the water. You can see it when you look at a fish. If you look at this fish up here, can you see the line that goes all the way down the side?
Yes.
That's the lateral line. It's sometimes hard to see. It blends in with the scales almost. It's between two sets of scales. It's right there. But that allows a fish to sense vibrations and movement in the water. It's one of the reasons why it's so hard to catch a fish with your hands or with a net when it's in the water. As soon as you make a move for it, it senses those vibrations can get away pretty easily.
What about whales and they're
What about whales?
yeah,
We're not going to talk about whales or dolphins, still mammals.
No, I just mean about what about the high pitched things?
Their sonar, yeah, fish don't have that ability.
That's why they're stupid.
What about hillbilly hen?
They're sticking their hands in
I mean, I'm not saying you can't catch them, but it's difficult. Depends on the type of fish.
But they're catching hen.
All right, also, fertilization. So for each species, we'll talk about its reproduction. Fish, and what we're going to talk about is, there's two things to think about. Where are the eggs fertilized? And then where do the young grow and hatch? So for fish, they have what's called external fertilization. We call it spawning. So fish and all of these vertebrates, they have male and female. They have separate sexes. Females produce eggs. Males produce sperm. And what happens for fish reproduction, when they spawn, female fish release their eggs just into the water. And males just release sperm into the water. They sort of mix together, and then some of the eggs get fertilized by some of the sperm cells. Some don't get fertilized. But in order to grow into an actual fish, the egg cell has to get fertilized by a sperm cell. So that's called spawning, and one female fish can actually, at one time, lay hundreds of thousands of eggs at once. Now, obviously, can they all grow into adult fish?
No.
No, because our rivers would just be clogged up with fish if that were the case. One single female fish releases hundreds of thousands of eggs. So what happens to them? Well, a large percentage never even get fertilized by the sperm cells, so they can't grow. Then a lot of them are eaten. Eggs are a good source of food for all sorts of predators. The ones that do survive both those things, some of those young that hatch, they don't get enough food, so they can't survive. So really only a very small percentage of those eggs actually make it into adult fish.
Even if the egg's not fertilized, it's still good food for them.
Yeah. Animals will eat a fertilized or unfertilized egg regardless. They're both good food sources.
How long could a unfertilized baby last for?
Not very long, maybe a few days I would
Is
guess.
it like a chicken egg kind of?
No, they're soft. It's basically a tiny little cell surrounded by a drop of protein and fat. So no, it's not. There's no hard shell or anything. It's just like a soft sort of. Yeah, sort of a little bubble of stuff. Yeah. Caviar is the eggs of a female sturgeon, a big fish that lives in cold waters, and people eat caviar, which is fish eggs.
I know what it's called. I forgot.
You just said caviar, fish eggs.
Yeah, but I know the fish that.
Oh, the sturgeon.
Yes.
Yeah.
You just said that.
All right, fish obviously live in the water, and they absorb oxygen from the water using their gills. I don't really like the word breathing, because that sort of like means taking air into the lungs, but you can think of it as breathing. And fish's gills absorb oxygen from the water and release carbon dioxide into the water, just like our lungs do.
Mr. Russ. So would that make them a mammal?
No, because mammals are warm-blooded and have hair and so forth.
Where do they go to the bathroom?
In the water.
Yeah, but like where?
They have an opening. They have an opening in their digestive tract on the ventral side of
Does
the
it look like a latch?
So fish take in water. Basically, fish bring water into their mouth and then sort of allow it. Then they have their gills are attached to their mouth, and then they force it over their gills and out of their body. If you ever look closely at a fish, you see on the side of its head it has two flaps that go in and out. What happens is those flaps, it takes water in through its mouth, then it passes over those gills and out of those flaps. And the gills are very, very thin, they're very fragile, and in the water they work great. They're filled with blood vessels, they're very red and rich in blood because they're absorbing oxygen. But once they get out of water, they don't have the support of the water, and they all kind of collapse on each other, and that's why almost all fish cannot breathe out of the water. So once they come out of the water, those gills do not work anymore. They can't absorb oxygen from the air.
Almost all fish?
Yeah, there's certain things like the mud skipper is a fish which can breathe air. And mud skippers actually can crawl from one pond to another. They can go up onto the shore, into the mud. They use their fins to sort of walk around. They eat little stuff on a thing, then they can go back in the water. And they can actually get oxygen from the air.
Like they can just live either.
Yeah, they not need to be moist though, but they can live sort of, they go onto the shore for ways. They can't like live in a desert or anything, but they can go on the shore, unlike most fish.
Is that why they always like swim with their mouths open?
Yeah, and they swim with their mouth open, and as they're swimming, water's going in and then out of those gill openings. Or also, if you've ever been fishing, you know, when you catch a fish and you want to hold on to it but keep it alive, they have those little chains with little hook things. You basically put the hook part into the fish's mouth, and then the other end comes out of that gill opening, and then you clip it together. You're not like puncturing anything in the fish, it's just an opening there. It's open from the mouth to the outside.
When the fish is out of the water, not the mud skipper, but they kind of suffocate.
Yeah, it basically suffocates. Its gills sort of collapse, and they all sort of smush together, and it can't absorb any oxygen. But in the water, water's sort of holding them all separated so that there's a lot of surface area to absorb oxygen.
Have you ever like held a perch and it has those like anything with its
Oh, on its gills, yeah.
back?
Yeah, and its
So-
fins are real spiny and yeah. All right, another interesting adaptation that fish have is something called a swim bladder. Swim bladder allows the fish to maintain its buoyancy. Do you know what that word means? Buoyancy?
What is a boy?
Gene?
I got this. Okay. Buoyancy means the art of
The art of?
the art of
All right, go on, come on.
buying
Anything?
time to answer the question.
No.
Maintains buoyancy.
Buoyancy
Which
is
is the art of.
floating up and down in the water. So, for
See, that's
example,
my next guess.
if you take let's say you're in the pool, you have a beach ball. If you completely deflate the whole thing, okay, you can swim to the bottom of the pool with it, no problem.
Oh, I know what it is.
If you inflate it a little bit, not so it's full, but maybe halfway, you could probably swim halfway down with it, but if you held on to it, it'd probably keep you afloat in the middle of the water. Or if you inflate it all the way, which you probably have done before, you try to hold a beach ball into the water, what happens? It pops right back up. So a fish basically has a little sort of balloon inside of it that it can force air into or force the air out of. If it forces most of the air out, it can go very low in the water, sinks down low. If it forces air into it, it floats higher. If it fills it up all the way, it floats very high. And they can adjust this, and that allows them to float at different levels. Like if you're in the pool and you're trying to like do a backflow, if you breathe in very deeply and you hold your lungs filled with air, you can float real easily. But then if you exhale all that air, then you start to sink. And fishes do the same thing. They could change how high or how low they float based on this swim bladder, this internal organ that they can inflate or deflate.
I caught a fish one time, and it had like this bubble in its mouth.
All right, I got a story about that. So
I
this,
popped it too.
okay, so this, was it alive or dead?
It was
Okay, so this same class I was telling you about, the fishing class that I took. So we went out to Lake Champlain in Vermont, and we went out in the lake. It's a big, deep lake, and we went on a fishing boat. One of those kind where you put nets in the water, then you hoist them back on, and you spill the fish all over, and then you can look at them, you study them, do whatever you need to do. So we did this, and when we hoisted those all those fish in the water, what we saw is a lot of fish, like Michael was talking about, is most of ours were dead, and their mouth was sort of forced open, and poking out of their mouth was a little bubble, a little yellowish bubble that's filled with a gas. What happened in that case and what happened in your case is these fish were 50 or 60 feet below the surface of the water. And so when you're 50 or 60 feet below, there's a huge amount of pressure. Like if you swim to the bottom of the 10-foot deep pool, you know how it feels on your ears?
Yeah.
That's because of the water pressures all pushing down on your eardrum. Well, imagine 50 or 60 feet underwater. So all that pressure on a fish, it keeps their swim bladder very small. So it has gas in it, but all that pressure is pressing on it. Now, as they come to the surface, if they just swam up on their own, as they swam up, the pressure would decrease, it would get larger, but then they could let it out. But if you bring them to the surface too quickly, then all that pressure is released. Their swim bladder swells up, and they aren't able to release that gas. So it swells up inside of them, it pokes out of their mouth, and basically it crushes their organs, and eventually they could die. But you popped it, so, and the fish was alive.
Yeah.
And so now that fish is no longer going to be able to use that swim bladder to maintain its buoyancy. But at least yours was alive. The fish we caught were all pretty much dead. We brought them up too quickly, and then their swim bladder basically pumped up.
So if you pop it, does it just stay on the top surface?
No, they would just have to use a lot more energy to get up higher in the water. They have to swim their way up there rather than getting air in there and sort of floating up. Also, all right, one more story about my fishing class, because we're almost done. One thing, another interesting thing is we got to go electrofishing.
Oh, this is
Shot the water.
Yeah, so electrofishing is, and I got to do this, I got to wear the backpack. You put this backpack generator on, it's got gas in it, and you start it up and everything, kind of like one of those backpack leaf blowers. But instead you have two electrodes in your hands, these two long wands. And you can, they each have a trigger. And what you basically, you walk through the river, and as you walk, you press on, if you press on both of them, that sends an electrical current from the end of one to the end of the other. And any fish that are in that area get knocked unconscious, and they just float to the surface of the water. So when you press it, you walk through the stream like this, and all these fish, hold on, they just start floating to the water, and people you're with usually have nets with them, and as you walk through the water shocking the fish, they net them up, put them in buckets, and then you could mark them or study them, measure them, whatever you need to do. You have to wear, obviously, you have to wear rubber boots, and you also have to be very careful of the people you're working with, because if, for example, they reach in the water to grab a fish, and you have the electrodes on, then they can get a shock. Also, sometimes, you know, when you're walking through a stream, people stumble all the time on all the rocks, and so if you ever hear anybody splash in the water, you have to immediately let go of the electrodes to take away that current, otherwise they're not going to get killed. It's enough of a current to knock unconscious small fish, and you could adjust it. If you're looking to get big fish out of there, you would turn the current up so you can knock out the bigger fish. But basically after 5 or 10 minutes, they regain consciousness and they're okay. Sometimes some of them die, but not always. Yeah, River? Nope, one more thing, don't put your notes way up.
On the Simpsons, Homer drops like a bug zapper in the water. They I think he leaves it in or something, but he reaches and grabs the fish, bites it, he's getting electrocuted as he does that.
Yeah. One time, here's another electric story. So this is not related to fish at all. But I was in my house, and Mr. Arcurius helped me. We were working in my house, building a new room in my house, and I was putting in an outlet. And I thought I turned the power off to that outlet when I was putting it in, but I didn't. And so I was working out, I was putting it in, and then I touched the wire, and so I got zapped. I was like, and guess what Mr. Arcurius' response was?
You laugh.
He just burst out laughing while I was getting shocked by the outlet.
Wait, is it true that you keep holding on?
No, well, I mean, I didn't grab it. I just had touched it with the side of my hand, so I got like a shock like this. But sometimes if you grab something
Good afternoon,
electrically
everyone.
charged,
Davies
it
boxing
can
and
knock
wrestling matches in Camden canceled for today.
Hold on, one more thing right now.
Practice at 4 p.m. today at the junior high school. So the match is canceled, you have practice. Jazz band students, reminder to bring your instruments bring your instruments tonight and to report to the high school band room today at 4 p.m. Jazz band students, report with your instruments at 4 to the high school band room. Students, it's extremely windy out, very windy. Please proceed to your buses and rides immediately upon getting out there. If you want to stay in school, especially second right run, you may, all right? But again, do not miss your buses. And a reminder, stay behind the yellow line. Bus drivers have been calling you. They don't want to put anybody in danger. You must stay behind the yellow line.
Hold on one
That's
second.
it for today. Everybody bright and early tomorrow.
All right, real quickly, if you wrote that down, fish have just a heart that has just 2 chambers. Hold on. We're going to talk about all the other groups, but it basically is 1 chamber to take blood in, 1 chamber to pump blood out. All right, we're done.
When you're on the wall,